The hardest part about losing someone is not when they walk away. It is when they are still there, but somehow you no longer know how to reach them. I never thought there would be a day when talking to Noah Bennett would feel difficult. There was a time when we could spend hours sharing stories, laughing about small things, and discussing every detail of our lives without ever running out of things to say. He was the person I could call after a long day, the person who understood what I meant even when I did not explain everything. But somewhere along the way something changed. The conversations became shorter. The messages became less frequent. The comfortable silence we once shared started feeling different. It was not an argument. There was no dramatic moment where everything suddenly fell apart. Instead, it happened slowly, almost quietly, until one day I realized I could not remember the last time we had a real conversation. My name is Ethan Walker, and for most of my life, I believed that relationships faded because people stopped caring. I thought distance happened when someone decided they no longer wanted to be part of your life. But my situation with Noah was confusing because I never felt like either of us truly wanted to leave. We were still connected, just separated by something neither of us knew how to explain. I remember sitting in my apartment one evening, looking at my phone and seeing Noah's name on the screen. I wanted to send a message, something simple, something that would reopen the door between us. But I stopped myself. I wondered if too much time had passed. I wondered if reaching out would make things uncomfortable. The strange thing was that I missed someone who was only a message away. Over the years, Noah had become more than just a friend. He was part of my everyday routine, part of the memories I looked back on when I needed comfort. We had shared ordinary moments that somehow became unforgettable. Weekend coffee runs, conversations during long walks, and the small jokes that only made sense to us. Those were the things I missed the most. Not the big events, not the special occasions, just the simple feeling of knowing someone was there. I often wondered if Noah felt the same way. Maybe he was also looking at his phone, thinking about sending a message but deciding against it. Maybe he also believed that I had changed or that I no longer needed him in my life. The truth was I did not know, and that uncertainty became the hardest part. As weeks turned into months, I started accepting the silence as normal. I convinced myself that maybe some connections were only meant to last for a certain chapter of life. But deep down, I knew that was not true. Some people leave a space in your life that cannot easily be filled. Noah was one of those people. I did not know it then, but our story was not over. The distance between us was not the end. It was only the beginning of understanding what we had almost lost. I started noticing that silence has a strange way of becoming comfortable, even when it is something you never wanted. At first, I thought the distance between Noah Bennett and me was temporary. I believed one of us would eventually reach out, say something simple, and everything would return to the way it used to be. But days passed, then weeks, and the space between us slowly became part of our routine. The hardest part was that nothing was truly wrong. There was no single moment I could point to and say, that was when everything changed. It was just a collection of small moments where we both seemed to step back at the same time. Looking back, I realized that sometimes people do not lose connections because they stop caring. Sometimes they lose them because they do not know how to handle the changes happening around them. During that period, I started thinking about the beginning of my friendship with Noah. We met several years earlier when we were both trying to figure out what direction our lives were heading. I was focused on building a stable future, while Noah was exploring different opportunities and trying to understand what truly mattered to him. Despite our differences, we connected easily. Noah had a way of making ordinary conversations feel meaningful. He could turn a simple coffee break into a discussion about dreams, memories, and the kind of people we wanted to become. I admired that about him. He reminded me to slow down and appreciate moments I would normally overlook. For Noah, I think our friendship represented something different. He once told me that he appreciated having someone who listened without judging him. I never considered that to be something special because, to me, friendship was about being present. But maybe that was exactly what made it important. Over time, life became busier for both of us. Responsibilities changed, schedules became harder to manage, and the easy conversations we once had required more effort. I think we both noticed the change, but neither of us wanted to admit it. There was a fear that bringing attention to the distance would somehow make it worse. So instead of talking about it, we allowed the silence to grow. One evening, I opened an old photo album and found pictures from some of the moments Noah and I shared. There were pictures from weekend trips, casual gatherings, and days that seemed completely ordinary at the time. Looking at those memories reminded me of how natural our friendship once felt. I realized I was not only missing the conversations. I was missing the version of myself that existed when Noah was part of my everyday life. That thought stayed with me for a long time. I wondered if I had made the mistake of assuming that important relationships would always take care of themselves. Maybe I believed that because a connection was strong, it did not need attention. But I was starting to understand that even the strongest bonds require effort. The next morning, I opened my phone again and looked at Noah's name. My finger hovered over the message button. I wanted to write something, but I still did not know what to say. Then I received a notification that stopped me for a moment. It was not a message from Noah, but it was a reminder of a memory we shared. And suddenly, I realized that maybe I was not the only one holding on. I finally decided that waiting for the perfect words was only another way of avoiding the conversation I knew I needed to have. For so long, I had been afraid that reaching out to Noah Bennett would change everything. But the truth was, everything had already changed. The silence between us was already something different from the friendship we once had. If I wanted answers, I had to be willing to take the first step. I spent almost an entire evening writing and rewriting a simple message. Every version felt either too casual or too serious. I did not want to pretend nothing had happened, but I also did not want to make Noah feel like he was being blamed. After several attempts, I finally sent a short message asking how he had been. Then I placed my phone down and tried not to think about it. I expected hours of waiting, but the reply came sooner than I imagined. Noah said he was glad I reached out. Those few words immediately made me realize something important. He had been waiting too. The next day, we agreed to meet at a small cafe where we used to spend time together years earlier. Walking inside brought back memories I had not thought about in a long time. The same tables were still there. The same quiet atmosphere filled the room, and for a moment it felt like we were stepping back into an older version of our lives. But we both knew things were different now. Noah smiled and told me he had almost sent a message many times. Hearing that surprised me because I had spent months thinking I was the only one who missed our friendship. He admitted that he worried I had moved on and no longer wanted the same connection. I told him I had been thinking the exact same thing. That was the moment we both realized the distance between us was not caused by a lack of care. It was created by two people who cared but were afraid of saying the wrong thing. As we talked, we started remembering the moments that brought us close in the first place. Noah reminded me of conversations I had completely forgotten, including small details that showed he had always paid attention. I laughed because I realized he remembered things I never considered important. But that was always something special about Noah. He noticed the details. He remembered the feelings behind the moments. I asked him why he never told me he missed our friendship. He looked down for a moment and said he thought I was happier without him around. That answer stayed with me because it showed me how easily people can create stories in their minds when they do not communicate. I had spent months believing Noah was letting go, while he had been doing the same thing I was doing, quietly hoping the other person would return. By the time we left the cafe, we both understood that rebuilding our connection would take time. We could not simply return to the past and pretend nothing had happened. But we could choose what happened next. And as I watched Noah walk beside me through the neighborhood we once knew so well, I realized that maybe the strongest connections are not the ones that never face challenges. They are the ones where two people choose to find each other again. After that first conversation with Noah Bennett, I thought reconnecting would feel easier. I imagined that once we finally spoke honestly, everything would naturally return to the way it used to be. But I quickly learned that rebuilding a connection is not about going backward. It is about understanding what changed and choosing to move forward together. Over the next few weeks, Noah and I started talking more often again. At first, our conversations felt careful, almost like we were both trying not to disturb something fragile. We shared updates about our lives, talked about everyday experiences, and slowly remembered how comfortable it felt to simply be around each other. But there was still something between us that we had not discussed. The reason we had drifted apart in the first place. I knew that avoiding the topic would only leave the same distance waiting for us again. One evening, while we were walking through the neighborhood, I asked Noah if he remembered when things started feeling different between us. He became quiet for a moment and said he did. He told me he had noticed the change before I did. At first, he thought I was becoming busier and needed more space. He did not want to interrupt my life or make me feel responsible for keeping the friendship the same. I was surprised because that was never how I felt. I thought Noah was the one who had become distant. I thought maybe his priorities had changed and I was no longer important to him. Hearing his perspective showed me how differently two people can experience the same situation. We were both looking at the same distance, but we were interpreting it in completely different ways. Noah explained that during that period, he was going through many changes in his own life. He was trying to make important decisions about his career, his future, and the kind of person he wanted to become. He said he did not want his uncertainty to affect me, so he became quieter. Looking back, I realized I had done something similar. I was dealing with my own challenges and convinced myself that giving Noah space was the respectful thing to do. Neither of us wanted to lose the friendship. We were just afraid that reaching out at the wrong time would create more distance. That realization stayed with me because it reminded me how easily misunderstandings can grow when people stop sharing what they feel. Sometimes silence is not a sign that someone has stopped caring. Sometimes it is a sign that someone cares so much that they are afraid of making things worse. As we continued walking, Noah smiled and said it was strange that we had both spent so much time wondering if the other person still cared. I laughed because I had been thinking the exact same thing. For the first time in a long time, the weight of the unanswered questions started to disappear. We were not trying to erase the months we spent apart. We were learning from them. That night, I understood that our friendship had changed, but change did not always mean something was lost. Sometimes it meant there was an opportunity to create something stronger. And as Noah and I continued talking, I realized the hardest part was no longer finding a way back to each other. The hardest part was accepting that we had both been waiting for the same moment all along. After Noah Bennett and I finally talked honestly about the distance that had grown between us, I expected things to feel completely different. I thought the moment we understood what happened would remove every doubt we had carried. But I learned that rebuilding trust is not a single conversation. It is a collection of small moments where two people choose to show up for each other again. In the weeks that followed, Noah and I slowly created a new routine. We started meeting for coffee, sharing updates about our lives, and finding comfort in conversations that once felt impossible. It was interesting because we were not trying to recreate the past. We were learning who we had both become during the time we spent apart. I realized that I had been holding on to an older version of Noah, the person I remembered from years earlier. But people change. Experiences shape them. Challenges teach them. The person sitting across from me was still Noah, but he was also someone who had grown in ways I never saw. One afternoon, we talked about the things we had experienced during our time apart. Noah told me about the decisions he had made, the lessons he learned, and the moments when he had to trust himself even when he was uncertain. I shared my own experiences too. I told him about the times when I felt stuck, the moments when I questioned whether I was making the right choices, and the ways I had learned to appreciate the simple things in life. What surprised me was realizing that both of us had been quietly going through similar emotions. We thought we were alone in our struggles, but we had actually been facing many of the same questions. Noah smiled and said maybe that was why our friendship mattered so much. We did not have all the answers, but we had always been able to remind each other that we were not facing life alone. That conversation made me think about how many relationships change because people only see the surface. We notice when someone becomes quieter, but we do not always ask why. We notice when someone creates distance, but we do not always consider what they might be carrying. I had spent months thinking Noah was choosing to step away from me, but I never stopped to wonder if he was simply trying to handle his own life. As our friendship grew stronger again, I began noticing the small things I had missed. The way Noah still remembered details from conversations we had years ago. The way he always asked questions because he genuinely wanted to understand. The way he could make an ordinary afternoon feel meaningful. Those qualities were part of why our friendship had been important from the beginning. One evening, while we were sitting outside a small restaurant, Noah told me something that I did not expect. He said that losing contact with me had made him realize how much he valued the people who brought stability into his life. He admitted that he had taken our connection for granted because he assumed it would always be there. I told him I felt the same way. We had both believed the friendship was strong enough to survive without attention. But we learned that even meaningful connections need care. That night, I understood something important. The time we spent apart was painful, but it also showed us what we truly valued. Sometimes people need distance to recognize the importance of being close. And as Noah and I continued rebuilding our friendship, I knew we were not simply returning to what we had before. We were creating something more honest, more intentional, and stronger than anything we had shared in the past. The more Noah Bennett and I rebuilt our friendship, the more I realized that reconnecting was not about fixing something that was broken. It was about understanding each other in a way we never had before. The time apart had changed us both, and instead of ignoring those changes, we started accepting them. That made our conversations feel more honest than they had ever been. We no longer talked just because it was part of our routine. We talked because we genuinely wanted to know what was happening in each other's lives. One evening, Noah and I sat outside a quiet cafe after a long day. The weather was calm, and the neighborhood around us felt familiar. We talked about simple things at first, but eventually the conversation became deeper. Noah asked me if I ever regretted the time we spent apart. I thought about it carefully before answering. I told him that I did regret losing those months of connection, but I also understood that those months taught us something important. Without that distance, we might have continued assuming that our friendship would always stay the same without effort. Noah agreed. He said, "Sometimes people do not realize the value of something until they experience what it feels like to almost lose it." That sentence stayed with me because it perfectly described what had happened between us. We had never truly wanted to walk away from each other. We had simply forgotten how important it was to keep choosing each other. As we continued talking, Noah shared something he had never told me before. During the time when we barely spoke, there were many moments when he wanted to reach out. He remembered seeing things that reminded him of conversations we had shared, and he often thought about sending me a message. But every time, he convinced himself that maybe too much time had passed. Maybe I had moved on. Maybe I did not feel the same connection anymore. Hearing that made me realize how much time we had both spent creating fears that were never real. I told Noah about all the times I almost contacted him too. We laughed because we had both been standing on opposite sides of the same situation, each waiting for the other person to take the first step. That realization made our friendship feel even more meaningful. It showed me that strong connections are not always effortless. Sometimes they require patience, understanding, and the courage to admit when something matters. Over the next few weeks, Noah and I started creating new memories together. We visited places around the city that we had never explored before. We shared stories about our current lives instead of only talking about the past. Slowly, our friendship became something different from what it had been before. It was not based only on familiarity. It was based on a deeper appreciation for the person standing in front of us. One day, Noah told me that he was grateful our friendship had a second chance. I smiled and told him that maybe it was not a second chance. Maybe it was the first time we were truly understanding what we had. Because before, we knew each other through shared experiences. Now, we were learning to know each other through honesty. That difference changed everything. Looking back, I realized the silence between us had been painful, but it also revealed something powerful. Connection that matters does not disappear simply because life becomes complicated. Sometimes it waits quietly, hoping that two people will find their way back when they are ready. And as Noah and I continued moving forward, I started wondering about the one thing we still had not talked about. The exact moment when we both began drifting apart. I used to believe that the hardest part of losing a connection was the moment when two people stopped talking. But after finding my way back to Noah Bennett, I realized something different. The hardest part was understanding why we let the distance happen in the first place. The silence between us was not created by one big mistake. It was created by small decisions, unanswered questions, and assumptions we never challenged. And now that we were finally rebuilding our friendship, we needed to understand the moment when everything started changing. One afternoon, Noah and I sat together at the same cafe where we first talked after reconnecting. It had become a place where we could have honest conversations without distractions. I asked him a question I had been thinking about for a long time. I asked him when he first felt that something between us had changed. Noah looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. He said it started during a period when both of our lives were becoming more complicated. He remembered that I seemed more focused on my responsibilities and less available than before. He said he did not blame me because he knew everyone goes through seasons where life becomes overwhelming. But he admitted that he started wondering if our friendship was no longer as important to me as it once was. Hearing that was difficult because it was never how I felt. I told Noah that during that same period, I was dealing with my own doubts. I thought he had become more distant because he was building a different life. I saw him becoming busier and assumed he was naturally moving in another direction. I never considered that he might be feeling the same uncertainty I was feeling. That was the moment we both understood the real reason behind the distance. We had not stopped caring. We had simply misunderstood each other. Noah explained that he remembered one conversation in particular that stayed with him. It was a simple conversation where I told him that people sometimes need time to figure things out and that changing direction does not mean someone has failed. At the time, I forgot about those words almost immediately, but Noah said they helped him during a period when he was questioning his own choices. I was surprised because I never realized that something so small could matter so much. He told me that was one reason he valued our friendship. I made him feel understood without trying to solve every problem. I just listened. That made me think about how often people underestimate the impact they have on others. We measure our influence through big actions, but sometimes a simple conversation can become a memory someone carries for years. As we continued talking, Noah and I both admitted that we had been protecting ourselves from a problem that did not actually exist. We were afraid of losing something important, but our fear prevented us from protecting it. That realization changed the way I looked at our friendship. We were not two people trying to repair something damaged. We were two people learning how to communicate better than before. Walking home that evening, I felt a sense of peace I had not felt in a long time. The questions that had followed me for months finally had answers. But there was still one thing I wanted to understand. I wanted to know if Noah had ever truly believed we were going to lose each other forever. I had spent so much time wondering if Noah Bennett and I were slowly becoming strangers that I never stopped to consider something important. Maybe the connection we had was never truly disappearing. Maybe it was simply changing into something we both needed to understand. After all the conversations we shared, I started seeing our time apart differently. It was not just a period of silence. It was a lesson about communication, trust, and the importance of not assuming we know what another person is feeling. A few days after our conversation at the cafe, Noah and I decided to take a walk through the neighborhood where we had spent so much time together in the past. The streets looked familiar, but everything felt different because we were seeing them through a new perspective. We talked about memories we had forgotten and laughed about moments that seemed ordinary at the time but became meaningful later. Noah mentioned that one of the things he missed most during our time apart was the simple comfort of having someone who understood him without needing a long explanation. I told him I felt the same way. It was not about needing constant attention or talking every day. It was about knowing there was someone who genuinely cared about what was happening in your life. That understanding was something we had both underestimated. As we walked, Noah asked me a question that made me think deeply. He asked if I believed we would have found our way back to each other if neither of us had reached out. I considered the question carefully. The honest answer was that I did not know. Life has a way of moving forward quickly, and sometimes people lose connections not because they stop caring, but because they allow time to make decisions for them. I told Noah that I was grateful we had both chosen to take a chance and start talking again. He smiled and said he felt the same. Then he admitted something that surprised me. During the months we were distant, he never truly stopped considering me an important person in his life. Even when we were not talking, he would see something that reminded him of a conversation we had or think about sharing something with me. He said the connection was still there, even when we were not actively maintaining it. Hearing that meant more than I expected. It reminded me that meaningful relationships are not measured only by how often people communicate. They are measured by the care and understanding that remain even during difficult periods. That evening, I realized that Noah and I had both been afraid of losing something that was already strong enough to survive challenges. We were so focused on the possibility of separation that we forgot to trust what we had built together. From that point forward, we decided to be more intentional. We made time for each other, asked questions instead of making assumptions, and allowed our friendship to grow naturally. It was not about returning to the exact relationship we had before. It was about creating something better based on everything we had learned. Looking back, I realized the silence between us had given us a valuable lesson. Sometimes the connections that matter most are not the ones that never face obstacles. They are the ones where two people are willing to find each other again. And as Noah and I continued moving forward, I knew there was only one final question left. What had we truly learned from almost losing something we both cared about so deeply? When I look back at everything that happened between Noah Bennett and me, I realized that the most important part of our story was not the time we spent apart. It was what we discovered when we found our way back to each other. For a long time, I believed strong connections were defined by how easy they were. I thought the best relationships were the ones where nothing changed and nothing created distance. But Noah taught me something different. A meaningful connection is not measured by whether challenges appear. It is measured by whether two people are willing to understand each other when those challenges arrive. After everything we had shared, Noah and I continued building a friendship that felt different from before. It was more honest because we no longer assumed we knew what the other person was thinking. We asked questions. We listened. We made time for conversations that mattered. The simple things became important again. A short coffee together. A walk through the neighborhood. A message asking how the other person was doing. These moments were small, but they reminded us that relationships are built through consistent care. One evening, Noah and I sat together and talked about how different things felt compared to the past. He told me that he used to believe losing touch meant losing the connection completely. But now he understood that some bonds can survive changes, distance, and time when both people recognize their value. I told him that I had learned the same lesson. I had spent months believing that the silence between us meant something was ending. Instead, it showed me how much the friendship actually meant. If I did not care, I would not have missed those conversations. If Noah did not care, he would not have been waiting for a chance to reconnect. We both realized that the reason we struggled so much with the distance was because the connection had always mattered. It was never about forcing things back to the way they were. It was about accepting that we had both grown and allowing our friendship to grow with us. Looking back, I think about how easily misunderstandings can change the course of relationships. Two people can care about each other and still create distance if they stop communicating. They can believe they understand each other while quietly carrying completely different thoughts and fears. That was what happened to Noah and me. We were never truly letting go. We were simply waiting for the other person to show that the connection was still important. Our story reminded me that sometimes the people who matter most are not the ones who are always present without challenges. They are the ones who remain meaningful even when life creates space between you. Noah was still the person who made ordinary moments feel important. He was still the person who understood parts of me that others did not see. The difference was that now we both appreciated it more. Today, when I think about the months we spent barely speaking, I no longer see them only as lost time. I see them as a reminder that people are not mind readers, that important relationships need attention, and that sometimes the strongest connections are the ones we choose again after almost losing them. Noah and I did not simply return to where we started. We created something new, something built on honesty, patience, and the understanding that some people are worth finding again.